Welcome. This is Tom Fedorek. I'm a senior guide at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. My favorite part of being a guide is helping our visitors to discover the small details that they might otherwise miss. We'll be looking at one on this virtual tour. It's right here in the cathedral's central portal, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. They form the base of the sculpture of St. John. Even though they couldn't be more front and center, visitors sometimes overlook them. Let's start by taking a closer look at the entire work. The limestone sculpture of St. John is 8.5 feet tall. It is the work of John Angel, a British-American sculptor. It was dedicated in 1947. What do you think John is looking at? Not down at us, not outward at the city. No, he's gazing up to the heavens. He's experiencing the visions that he will write down with the pen and paper he holds in his hands. John is the writer of Revelation, the final book of the Christian Bible. In the original Greek, Revelation's name is Apocalypse, which means unveiling. For centuries, Revelation has been a source of comfort to those who suffer from war, oppression, or injustice. John writes of the coming of a new heaven and a new earth, the New Jerusalem, where, in the words of Revelation, God will wipe away every tear, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things are passed away. But John also writes about the time before the coming of the New Jerusalem, when the world is afflicted by wars, famines, plagues, and other horrors. These catastrophes are introduced by the small figures we see beneath the feet of St. John, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. What a contrast between these dynamic figures and the prophet who stands above them. John stands motionless, transfixed by his visions. The horsemen lunge forward with propulsive force. Their mission is urgent, as we can tell from the intensity of their facial expressions. Look how they grimly fix their gaze on the horizon. Their windblown hair signals velocity. At the same time, the hair streaming above suggests a sky heavy with the clouds of a gathering storm. The horses lower their heads, as horses do when they clear a jump. As we look up at them from below, they seem to be hurtling over a precipice. Where have the horsemen come from, and what is their mission? In a historical sense, they come from the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament. Although Revelation is part of the New Testament, many scholars regard Revelation as a continuation of the prophetic tradition of the Hebrew Bible. The writer of Revelation was steeped in the writings of the prophets. About 2/3 of Revelation's 404 verses refer to one or another of the Hebrew prophets, and particularly to Ezekiel, Daniel, and the one we see here, Zechariah. Here we see Zechariah in Michelangelo's fresco for the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Even though the book of Zechariah was written 500 years before Revelation, the two scriptures have many elements in common. Both prophets meet angels who guide them through a series of mysterious visions. John has a vision of four horsemen, Zechariah with four charioteers. Here we see Zechariah's vision in an engraving that Gustave Doré created for an 1866 edition of the Bible. 4 is an important number in both the Hebrew prophets and Revelation. 4 is the number of the created world. Each of Zechariah's four chariots speed off to the four compass points. Each chariot is drawn by horses of different colors, white, red, black, dappled. As we'll see, Revelation's four horses are also of different colors. Zechariah's charioteers are the predecessors of Revelation's four horsemen, but Revelation adds an important feature. Zechariah does not name or describe his charioteers, but John makes each horseman an individual. Do you see how John Angel has differentiated one horseman from another? The first and fourth cry out as they ride. The second and third ride with jaws clenched. The fourth is bare-chested. The second wears armor. The first is clean-shaven. The others have facial hair. Each horseman inflicts a different misery on the world, symbolized by the object the horseman holds in his hand. The first horseman personifies conquest. Revelation describes him going forth, conquering and to conquer, riding a white horse, wearing a crown and holding an archer's bow. Here we see him on the left. He is wearing a coronet, a small crown, hard to see from the angle of this photo. He holds an archer's bow. We wonder, why a bow and not some other weapon? To understand the bow, it helps to have a little historical background. John wrote Revelation in the late 1st century. His first readers were members of the early Christian communities of the Eastern Roman Empire. At this time, Rome was the master of the entire Mediterranean, but to the east, on the plains of Iran, was the Parthian Empire. Parthians were fierce warriors renowned for their horsemanship and archery. Here, we see one executing the acrobatic maneuver known as the Parthian shot, as depicted on a 5th century bowl. One of the few wars the Romans ever lost had been with the Parthians. The Parthians were a potential threat to overrun the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire. The original readers of Revelation, living in the shadow of a possible Parthian invasion, would have understood full well why the horseman of conquest carries a bow. The second horseman personifies war. He wears armor and rides a red horse. Revelation says, he was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that men should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. Wars disrupt agriculture and trade. Food becomes scarce and expensive. It follows then that the third horseman is famine. He rides a black horse and holds scales for measuring out grain. As he appears, a voice cries out, "A quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius." A denarius was a day's wage in the Roman Empire. At these prices, only the wealthy can eat, while the poor starve. Before we turn to the fourth horseman, let's revisit the colors of the horses, seen here in a modern window in the Cathedral of Clermont-Ferrand in the south of France. A white horse for conquest, red for war, black for famine, the same colors as in Zechariah. But for the fourth horseman, John abandons Zechariah's color scheme. The fourth horseman of Revelation rides what has traditionally been called a pale horse. But the Greek word that John uses, chloros, actually denotes a pale green color, as we see in this window. A sickly green, the color of decomposing flesh. For the fourth horseman is death. Behold a pale horse, and its rider was death, and Hades followed him, and they were given power over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. With these words, Revelation introduces the fourth horseman. The text does not associate any particular object with death. Nevertheless, artists through the centuries have put one thing or another into the fourth horseman's hand. Here, we see images from the 14th, 15th, and 19th centuries where death holds a sword, a pitchfork, and a sickle. John Angel exercised his own artistic license when he sculpted the fourth horseman. Look at what he placed in Death's hand. He created this work in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. Millions of tons of bombs were dropped in that war. I would suggest that the bomb we see here may not be just any bomb, but rather one very particular bomb, the one that inflicted unprecedented devastation upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The prospect of nuclear annihilation would haunt the world for the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st. Of late, it has been eclipsed by newer threats to our survival, such as global warming and the current worldwide pandemic. If John Angel were to create this work today, what object do you think he might put into the Fourth Horseman's hand? I'll conclude with one last observation. John Angel sculpted the Four Horsemen as human beings. I mention this obvious fact because not everyone who reads Revelation imagines them that way. Take a look at these pop culture images of the Four Horsemen as supernatural supervillains. John Angel might have taken this approach, but instead chose naturalism over theatricality. Look at their faces. Step into the coffee shop across the street from the cathedral, and you will see faces just like these, ordinary human faces. For what the Four Horsemen represent does not originate from the world of the supernatural. War, oppression, and inequality are miseries that humanity inflicts upon itself. Just a few steps away from the Four Horsemen, you enter the cathedral. It is a place of peace, filled with soft light and radiant color. Like its medieval predecessors, the cathedral is made in the image of the New Jerusalem, and it has long been our cathedral's mission to make John's vision of the heavenly city an earthly reality. The gospel of justice, equality, and peace is central to St. John the Divine's many ministries and programs, in the hope that oppression, injustice, and war shall pass away and be no more. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll watch our other virtual tours, and if you can, visit us in person. And when you do, don't forget to look for the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse on our western facade.